opportunity to learn more about the educational reform choices that are facing Vermont. My name is Lisa Peslich, and I'm on the leadership team of Bennington County Indivisible, who was one of the co-sponsors of this event. For those of you who are not familiar with Indivisible, we are a local chapter of a national organization, and you can find us at indivisible.org. We are a group of regular citizens who believe in being in communication with our politicians at the local, state, and federal level. We're not Democrats or Republicans. We welcome everybody who shares American values of respecting the Constitution, following the laws, making sure elections are free and fair, and protecting people's rights and defending their freedoms. We believe in equality and fairness for all people. We also value building community and communication, and so are proud to sponsor this educational forum. And next we're going to hear from Suzanne.
I'm Suzanne Kirkpatrick. I am president of the local chapter of AAUW, the American Association of University Women, an organization that was begun in 1881 to try to encourage women to go on to college and to get a good education. And it's an organization that is very concerned with education. I'm glad to see all of you here. I hope you get some valuable information. And Jill is going to explain how questioning will go on.
Hi, I'm Jill Fortney. I'm a member of Indivisible and a retired teacher in the SVSU. There were index cards available on the table and pens. So during the presentation, if you have a question about something that's been said, then at the end of the presentation, if you just pass your cards down to the end of the row, there are a couple of people who are going to be picking them up. We're going to quickly go through them to try and remove redundancy, and then I'm going to read the questions. If you have a question that you want to address to a certain person, then please make sure you do that. Please write as legibly as you can. Print if you can. And we're going to have a 5-minute break after the presentation. At this point, and please stick with the topic of the educational reforms, okay? I'd like to introduce our presenters, State Senator Seth Bomgaerts and Senator Rob Plunkett. And then, I believe we have the following state representatives in attendance: Tim Corcoran Jr., okay, Will Greer. Come on, Will, your hand's got to go a little higher. There you go. Mary Morrissey and Mike Nigro. Did I miss anybody? Okay, great. Then I'm ready to hand it over to Rob, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Can everyone hear me? I probably don't need the microphone, but everyone hear me. So, closer. All right. I will use the microphone properly, and when I move away like this, yell at me, please. So anyway, my name's Rob Plunkett. I'm one of your 2 state senators, assuming everyone here is from Bennington County or one of the 4 other towns that's attached. But I did actually want to find out where folks are from. So if everyone can raise your hand if you're from Bennington. Okay, mostly Bennington, Pownell. Got Pownell. And about Reedsboro. Stanford. Searsburg. Woodford. Shaftesbury. All right, North Bennington. Okay. And Arlington. Great. And we're mostly going to be focusing on the the southern part of the county anyway, and you'll see in a map in a second. Is there anyone else from any other towns that are in the county? Okay, so everyone's from the south here, so great. So we have a relatively short presentation here, because a lot of what we do want to hear is hearing from you, because we have all heard that there's going to be education reform coming, and the legislature's been working on that, but most of us are on different committees regarding that. Senator Bongartz is the chair of the Senate Education Committee, so he's been mired in this the entire time. But most of the committees now, we've finished the bulk of our work. A lot of the budget's done, capital bill's done, T-bill I think is done. It's not done. Tim's still going to be busy, but a lot of us are going to be just turning now directly to the education proposals. And we're focused on getting something out this year, and we'll be talking a little bit about what those proposals are and what we think will be coming. So that's, so just, all of you probably know in some way why we're doing this, but we want to talk a little bit about the context of why we're doing education reform. And it starts essentially with radical demographic changes. So over the past 30 years, it's about a 20% drop in the students. It's from 110,000 to now 84,000 students. That's just in K through 12. So that makes our funding, the structure, the number of buildings, all of that is something that you have to take another look at. The system itself, it has some fragility to it. I've always seen it as this really flexible sort of system that's gone over 200 years, grown to what it is now, but it isn't as flexible as we want, especially when we're coming to the funding part of it. So we have the high cost of operating many underutilized schools, and the lack of scale is one of the things we hear about, the lack of opportunities for some in their high schools where they don't have the classes, they don't have the sports, they don't have something that others might have. And so scaling it up is another thing that's being looked at. And as I mentioned, a lot of this is the funding mechanism. And the funding mechanism, and Seth, I hope will repeat his wonderful line, but it's so Byzantine that really nobody understands how it works. So a lot of you probably know this, but some key terms that you just will need to know is there's a school district, which is the governing body of a number of schools. So this is something like the Mount Anthony Union School District or the Arlington School District. And then above that, you also have supervisory unions, and that's sort of the umbrella group for the school districts. You can maybe think of it as sort of the host company for all these little other companies, in a way. But that's the broader district. So we have the Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union here, primarily. Here, operating district. An operating district is simply a school district that actually operates a public school, and a non-operating district is a district that doesn't, or at least for some portion of it. So North Bennington is one of those examples. So this is a map that you can look at a little bit and see maybe the outlines, but it's supposed to show you the two southern Bennington County supervisory unions. So that's SBSU compromising the Southwest Vermont Union Elementary. Sorry, the microphone's right in my way. Mount Anthony Union High School, and North Bennington, Arlington, and Sandgate, SBSU. And then we have the Wyndham Southwest Supervisory Union, which nobody hears from any of these towns, but we do have Reedsboro, Stamford, and Searsburg that are attached to that. So these are the questions that we are hearing about most of the time. And what we're hoping that we can at least get towards answering, but a lot of these simply can't be answered. You'll see the top one though. The top one is, will any of the proposals improve educational opportunities? And that is the number one question that that is always on all of our minds when we're talking about this. We'll probably get into this a little bit later, but it's very easy to get into the weeds of what these different proposals are, of where lines will be drawn, or how the funding's going to go. Keep in mind that at no point are we forgetting this particular question, and also always remind us about that question. So, a lot we hear, are the schools going to close? Are they going to be consolidated? Will any of the proposals save money? What will the consolidated school districts look like? And more importantly, what is the timeline for this? How fast are we going to move on this after 200 years? And what about healthcare? That's one of the things that's always part of the question when we're talking about school funding. And how will this change the career in technical education? So these are some of the questions that we're hoping we'll get to either tonight or perhaps in the next couple of weeks, because these few weeks coming up are going to be really focused in Montpelier, where we'll have about 3 weeks until the end of the session, and we're going to want to bill out by then. So this is really the time to focus and pay attention to what it is that we're doing. So we're going to go through a review of proposals, and Seth has been mired in this, so he's the one that's going to be going through this, but there are essentially 3 that have come up. One is the governor's proposal that I hope we won't spend much time on, except the foundation formula for that, because everyone's moved on from that. There's the House education proposal, and that passed out of the House. If folks don't know, bicameral legislature, when House starts a bill, they pass it out, it's moved on to the next chamber. So the Senate now has the House bill. And now the Senate has a whole, well, it's not a whole different, but it's a different proposal that builds off of essentially both of the other proposals. And it's now I'm going to hand it off to Seth, who's going to get more into the weeds of what the actual proposals are.
So, Rob touched on this, but before we start with the slides, let's just back up a little bit and remember what happened. Oh, yes. And remember what happened with property taxes when we voted 2 years ago. What happened is that this is the problem with the system that we have right now. On the one hand, when it passed 30 years ago, it did accomplish the key thing it was trying to accomplish at the time, which was to close the disparities in opportunities from property wealthy districts and districts that had less property wealth and therefore had a much harder time raising money to educate their kids. It has become over time distorted, and let me just say a couple things about it. Rob mentioned that I think the term Byzantine, which gets used a lot. The reality is when you go to vote on your school budget, you really don't know. You know what your school budget's going to be, but you don't know what that's going to mean for your property taxes, because everything is tied to what everybody else does all over Vermont. And as I have said about this system, it is almost ingenious in that nobody is responsible. And so what happens is voters all over Vermont vote their budgets, then it becomes one kind of big number collectively, and in the simplest terms, all the legislature does is set the multiplier to raise the money. 2 years ago across Vermont, the increase was 20%. And that is obviously not sustainable. There's a lot of reasons that happened. COVID had a major impact. There's a lot of things, but those COVID impacts are still with us, and they're going to be. And 20% increases, which the legislature managed to find some money to buy it down a little bit and get it down to 13%. But frankly, voters were really unhappy. and across Vermont, budgets went down. Legislators were not reelected. They got blamed, even though all they actually did was do what they were required to do under the law of setting the multiplier. But the system is clearly broken, and it's not sustainable in its current form. It's also having the perverse effect where some of the poorest districts in the state, or the districts with the most need for kids and the least ability to raise money, are back to where they were before because of everything, all the numbers going into it. Their taxes are going up. They feel like they can't afford it. And even though they could vote for more money locally and it wouldn't cost them anymore, they still vote no because all they see is the number and it's too high. So it's now having the perverse effect of the districts that are need the help the most are getting it the least. So the system is broken. It's not sustainable. So I give the governor a lot of credit. I don't agree with a lot of what the governor ended up proposing. The more I got into the proposal, the more there's about it I don't like. But I really give the governor credit because what he could have done is simply said, I'm not going to accept any number that comes out higher than X, and kind of taken a meat axe to budgets across the state. He didn't do that. What he's trying to do is come up with a systemic fix. And so I just want to start with saying I give him credit for that. And so, so what the governor proposed initially, let me hang on here. The bill was introduced, and as you know, as you may know, we have 85,000 kids, actually 84 something, kids in the system right now, pre-K through 12, and we have 119 school districts, 52 supervisory unions. That seems like it's a little excessive for the number of kids involved in that system. And so it's got built-in efficiencies because there's a lot of redundancies when you have that many SUs and that many districts. So when the governor talked about consolidating those, I think there's pretty widespread consensus that that's too many and we do need to bring it down. The question is, how do we do that? And so the governor's proposal was to move those 52 supervisory units and 119 school districts into 5 regional districts. That raised a lot of issues for people. There's a certain, what it does do is smooth out property inequities, across, taxing capacity inequities across the state. There's a certain efficiency to having fewer superintendents, fewer SUs. With conglomerating everything, you can have more specialized services at the district, those large district levels, because you can afford to have specialists that you couldn't afford to have for a smaller SU or a smaller district. So there's, on the one hand, there are a lot of things about it that make some sense. But there was also a real sense that it really didn't relate to the landscape in Vermont, and that it was just too large, and that people would become disconnected from the governance structure that went with it. And certainly, if you are in, like the one in Chittenden County that ran from most of Addison up through Chittenden County up through Grand Isle, had 35,000 students in it. So that's, that was a big district. And people from the smaller areas, more rural areas of that were going, well, wait, what about us? How do we get heard? And so it quickly became apparent that even though there's a logic to it, that they were way too big and people would feel disconnected and we needed to think about it differently. But what you'll see, the one thing that's across all 3 of these proposals is the next one down, which is moving to a foundation system that would provide a per pupil block grant for school districts. And so this is the model that I think 46 states use. Is that right, Mike? You must have heard this. I think it's 46 states out of the 50 use a foundation formula. And so what it really is, as you know, as you may know, students are weighted. They, because if you've got English as a second language, there's a weight for poverty, there's a weight for small schools, there's different weights that go in. So the actual number of kids, when I say 84,000, and once you apply the weights, it's more like 130 or something like that. because of what it costs to educate some kids compared to what it costs to educate others. And so both the governor's proposal has the foundation formula, the House proposal has the foundation formula, and that's what we're talking about in the Senate as well. So that's the common theme through all of these, is a recognition that the foundation formula is probably the way to go. So they had the governor's proposal, all 5 districts will be fully operating, because right now we have large swaths of the state where schools are not operating, and that's where we have in parts of the state independent schools that fill the gaps. And that's just enough on that one. So that's the governor's proposal. This is what the map looked like, and you can see that Chittenden district up there, maybe not the biggest geographically, but had a lot of kids in it. And you can see that the district down here ran up through most of Rutland County. So kind of the same, all those same things I was talking about the, the complications of that, and voters feeling disconnected would certainly perhaps run true with that one as well, that district. So the House proposal establishes a working committee over the summer made up of former public education officials to develop 3 proposals for school district consolidation. Each proposal, the target is to have a minimum of, or I guess a minimum size of 4,000 students. So that's bigger than what we have here, for instance. And if you look at the SVSU, with the 5 school districts of Arlington, Sandgate, Mount Anthony, USD, Southwest Vermont, North Bennington has 3,200 students. And across the map over to Twin Valley Union High School, our school district, Halifax, Reedsboro, Stanford, and Searsburg have 650. So together, that would get you to your 4,000, or virtually get you to your 4,000. That would still be a pretty big district. So that just as a touchstone for discussion. The House proposal mandates minimum class sizes for public and independent schools that serve publicly tuition students. Sets up a process where the legislature will make the final decision next year about school district boundaries, and establishes the new finance system, which would have a uniform property tax rate across the state and would provide a per pupil block rate, just sort of very similar to the governor's, based on a uniform statewide foundation amount. So then the Senate drafts, we've had 2 bodies working sort of all year on this, even though technically it started in the House. We were, of course, working on this in my committee, and the Finance Committee's been working on it all year, kind of getting ready for it to come over. So a handful of several fundamental changes to the House version. The Senate bill that's currently under consideration eliminates school and class size minimums. That has met with a lot of resistance, and there's another way, I believe, to get to the same thing, and we can talk about that before we're done here, but we've eliminated that, and we've also eliminated the notion of district minimum size requirements, and we sunset the Commission on the Future of Vermont Education, and we have a different process where it's all legislators instead of a committee made up of people who are not accountable to voters. We have this process for developing the maps of 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate. It's our job, it's what legislators do. Then we go around this, we'll be going around the state over the course of the summer, taking testimony, taking a lot of testimony from everybody and their brother across the state. And that's what legislators do, and then propose, hopefully, a map to the legislature, if we can get there, for consideration in January of 26. But at the same time, we're also putting in place Plan B, which is that if the legislature is unable to agree on a map by the end of January, Plan B would go into effect. And Plan B is to set up a system to make it easy for districts to consolidate on their own, because you will see that the funding formula, everything gets smoothed out. The districts are a little bit bigger, and so we think districts are going to look at this and go, yeah, it's better for us if we can consolidate and form somewhat bigger districts. But if the map doesn't pass, that's going to have to gain statewide consensus because legislators reflect their voters. So if there's a statewide consensus around a map, fine, we'll go with that. If not, we'll set up this process to make it easier for districts to merge. And then adjustments to the foundation formula, but the same basic foundation formula. And the difference between all three of these, and I think it's the next slide, is it? No, it's not, but anyway, we'll get to. One of the differences between all three proposals is the start date for the foundation formula. So the only reason this slide is up here is that these are actually, these blocks on a map are actually not blocks that relate directly to education. They're sort of proxies that have ended up getting used in the committees for figuring out how a foundation formula would work. But they're kind of close to county levels. And so these are the VS, and the reason they're up here is just because you will see as we talk about this, it relates back to this map. So as we've looked at these scenarios in my committee, and we're looking at the foundation formula and how to put it together, we've come up with we've run a series of numbers looking at different weights, how to weight what, how to rate ESL, English as a second language, how to weight poverty, how to weight the difference between high school and elementary school and those things. And so the one that we think, this is, we're not here to really get into the weeds on this part, but scenario B2 is the one that we seem to be landing on in the committee. And the main thing here, frankly, for Bennington County to understand is that we do, under any of the scenarios in the foundation formula, Bennington actually does pretty well. And the reason for that is that Bennington, the Southwest Supervisory Union and the BRSU, they're already pretty efficient. And so you have, relatively speaking, we all have gained the efficiency that we're trying to affect with this. So that's one reason, and the other is that you're relatively low spending compared to some other districts, some other areas of the state. So Bennington, this area does fairly well under frankly, any of the foundation formulas that we're looking at. Addison, just by way of example, doesn't do as well overall because a lot more little tiny schools, less efficient, and not as many ESL or poverty weights. They don't have that good. Just a lot of things are different for Addison than they are for Bennington. Just to give you a sense, so here's a little bit of a timeline comparison. The governor's plan was very aggressive. The goal was to have last March be the last time we ran budget and school budget votes the way that we have traditionally last March under the governor's plan. That was to be the last time. Then new school board members would be elected by 26, and the foundation formula would take effect in FY27. This is FY26 we're heading into that you just voted, so it would have taken effect in FY27. Pretty aggressive. The House plan limits tuition options starting in 25, but new districts drawn, class size minimums go into effect in 26, but the foundation formula wouldn't go into effect until, fully into effect until 2028 or 29. And there's a tension here, and I was talking with somebody about this earlier. There's a tension between wanting to do this really, really carefully and really methodically on the one hand, we all can get that, right? On the other hand, the system is coming unglued before our eyes. The only way the budgets are getting passed now is with cuts across Vermont. It's not true in every single district and every single SU, but we're in an era now where after the way the voters responded to that 20%, now it's cuts. And we're going to have school closings in sort of an haphazard way, unorganized way, and we're just cutting positions. CVU cut, arts and music and all kinds of things, and that's not the way for us to live. So there's tension, because the sooner we can get this up and running, the better the system, the better, on one hand, the better, but we also have to make sure we get it right. So the Senate version I talked about the way we're trying to do the map, if we can get it done early in January, or set up a process for districts to merge voluntarily. They don't have to, but they're probably going to want to, and we'll try to make that we'll have like models for how to do it from the agency and from the board, but we do have the funding formula with a 3-year transition mechanism going into effect on July 1, 2027, so FY28. So the Senate version does say we've got to get this thing moving, and frankly, the governor has made pretty clear he's not signing anything that doesn't do that. So we've got to get, if we want to have a bill, we want to get this done, we're going to try to get the funding back, get this thing up and running by FY27. I'm sorry, FY28, July 1, 27. So, and then with a lot of mechanisms into, if you get a lot more money, to have that happen over the course of 3 years, not immediately, or if you get less money, to have that happen over the course of 3 years, not immediately. And inside of all of this, with all of these proposals, there's an automatic multiplier, by the way. You can think of it as the CPI. It's actually got a different name, NPI, with a slightly different calculation that goes in. But effectively, it would be to take, under the Senate bill, it would be to take this year's $1.88 billion in school funding, and that would remain the base. And each year it would go up by the multiplier of, in your own mind, you can think of it as the CPI. And what we would finally have is somebody in control, somebody responsible, because the legislature will be responsible for setting that foundation amount and then overseeing what happens to it over the years. And in many districts across Vermont, you actually would no longer be voting a school budget, because what you would simply get the foundation amount, and you would spend it the way that, under the Senate version, you would be free to spend it the way that you think it makes sense to spend it. Not in these slides, but just so you know, there is, in the Senate Finance Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee did the same thing, there is going to be a mechanism. What I said about never voting your budget again is conceivably true, is possibly true, but there will be a mechanism where a district can vote up to 10% more. But the difference will be, and this is what we're trying to figure out how to do, that effectively, if you voted in whichever district, you're going to be the ones paying for it, not everybody across Vermont. So it'll be a little bit more directed at you, and you'll be responsible for the decision you make. And the way I look at this is, if we're here in Bennington County, if Windham County wants to do that, as long as the costs stay there, it's fine with me, right? And they'll be saying the same thing about us. And sometimes it'll make sense to do that for a given district. It might not be every year, but it might be some years. So there's a mechanism, there'll be a mechanism that the Finance Committee is working on for that to happen. So, here we are, back to the questions. I actually thought about a couple more that people might ask. One is school construction, and what about school construction, and also what about federal cuts? So, I don't know if you want to go through these, or you want to take a break now and get questions, get the questions on cards, however you want to do that. But these are just to let you know, I guess part of the point here is these are things that are swirling around and that we're obviously thinking about as we're putting this together. You know, if you look at healthcare, let me just say something about healthcare for a minute. You know, we think of the education crisis, the property tax crisis. Everybody's going into the session talking about the property tax crisis, and it is a crisis because people can't afford to pay. When people can't afford to pay their property taxes, that's a problem, and it's getting worse and worse. At the same time, as bad as it may be, and as much as that's a crisis, it is dwarfed by the healthcare crisis. And that is in part what's driving, of course, the education and the property tax crisis, because the cost of health insurance for employees is going up at such a rapid rate. And so, all I can say about that is that we know the healthcare committees are working hard on this issue, trying to really do serious systemic work on the healthcare system in Vermont to bend the cost curve. There may be some things that we can do over the course of the summer and into next year to help limit some of the rapidity of increase that the school system is absorbing through that. But in the end, that is going to require a deeply systemic fix, and there's other people working on that. I just wanted you to know. We know. Why don't I, does it make sense to leave it at that? If people want to hear these, how do you want to do this?
I think we'll let you collect some of those cards now.
Okay.
You can speak, and then why don't we also make sure we've got cards to get out if people want more cards.
Can I ask, though, if there are any representatives who are here who would like to make a statement at this time, since it sounds like your presentation is sort of concluding, right?
Yeah.
We're going to the Q&A.
Yep.
So if anybody has any comments to make at this time, if there's anything anybody would like addressed, I think, Rob, you had somebody who might be speaking on behalf of the CTEs here today. We would really like to hear a little bit more, that's a big part of our program here. So would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, come on up. Come on up. So, yeah, so I guess I should have made clear, part of the reason for being here is we don't know all the answers. And I spent a lot of my afternoon on Zoom calls with the Joint Fiscal Office and Legislative Council and other people thinking about CTEs and how to work them into this system, because they're, the career tech centers. And they are, I think it's fair to say, an increasingly important, maybe they always were, and maybe we're just finally figuring out how important they are. That's possible too. But they are definitely a very important part of this system. And the system isn't running as well as it should. But at the very least, we want to make sure that we're funding them. So, but here.
Yeah, right, put me on the spot. There you go. The guy wearing the Al Bundy jersey is going to tell you about career and technical education tonight. So my name is Rob Bonney. I work next door at Southwest Tech. I'm one of the administrators over there. I run the, thank you, Norm. Thank you, I appreciate that. I run our adult education programs. Most people don't realize that we educate adult students at Southwest Tech as well, and we usually have over 100 adult students every year, so that's my role there. And I came tonight just to ask questions about CTE, but here I am. Vermont has, I believe, 16 career and technical education centers across the state. Generally, we have them by county. So Southwest Tech, which is Southwest Vermont Regional Technical School District, which many of you know used to be called the Career Development Center. During COVID, it would seem to be a good time to not be the CDC anymore. No Centers for Disease Control jokes. So we serve all of Bennington County and Hoosick Falls. So students come to us from all those districts. Majority come from Mount Anthony, but we get a handful from Arlington. We get a few from BBA as well, and then we get a handful from Hoosick Falls. So CTE is also going through a transformation right now. There is work being done in the legislature, specifically in the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee, around CTE governance. This is something that's been being worked on for quite some time. I'd say probably at least 5 or 6 years. This has been discussed. Currently, right now, there are 4 different governance models in Vermont for CTE centers. Southwest Tech is its own school district, Southwest Vermont Regional Technical School District, and there are 3 others like us in the state, over in Springfield, Middlebury, and Barry. There are other CTE centers who are part of a supervisory union. There are 2 private school districts, CTE districts, and there's one other that I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been identified for a long time that is problematic, having hyper-local decision-making regarding statewide CTE. And there's a proposal right now that there be 1 CTE school district for the whole state. Speaking only for myself, that seems a little problematic to go from one extreme of CTE governance all the way to the other, to central control and Montpelier of CTE, knowing that many different regions of our state have different workforce development needs. What suits Chittenden County does not serve Bennington County, does not necessarily serve Addison County or Essex County, right? For those of us that work in CTE, though there's not necessarily agreement amongst all of us, I think a regional approach might make some sense as well. But really what I'm here to do is just make sure CTE isn't forgotten in this process, and I've been assured by all of our representatives here that it will not be, which is very reassuring. But also that we remember that we are in a very important part of the educational and workforce development system here in Vermont. We have a very high post-secondary placement rate at Southwest Tech. Almost 2/3 of our students go on to some sort of post-secondary education, whether that be a 6-week adult education program like mine, all the way on to college. So we do very, very well, and we're proud of the work that we do, but we want to make sure that CTE isn't just wedged into this system, right? And because the work is going on simultaneously in the legislature, we feel that it's important that CTE be looked at as part of the broader system and not just develop a governance system that maybe doesn't necessarily follow along with those maps that may be developed. So I have a kid I have to pick up at softball practice at 7 up at the middle school, but I can certainly take some questions about career and technical education if anybody wants to know anything about it. I won't tell any dad jokes. Yeah.
Yes, I'm very interested in this topic, and I'm curious if you could explain to us a little bit how you're funded and how you are a different entity than your typical public high school.
I'll do my best. So currently, and you certainly feel free to step in any part of this or any of our other representatives here. Currently, the funding follows the student, right? So when a student comes to Southwest Tech, their school district funds them to come to us, right? And that's a lot of money, but they are reimbursed through a Byzantine formula that's not well understood. So school districts are reimbursed, right, Laura, for sending their students to CTE. But the school district is responsible for sending that money up front, and then it is returned to them via the Agency of Education. They don't pay for all of it, they pay for the vast majority of it. I think it's something like 87 to 88% in the end of a student's tuition to a CTE center is reimbursed. But I'm not an accountant, so the mechanics of that is well beyond a sociology major from college. Does that answer your question?
Well, you also get federal funding, is that true?
Yes, so there's a program called Perkins, which is federal funding for CTE centers. It has a very difficult application process, and its uses are restricted. So it is really, to boil it down to its basics, is really a seed money. for new programs and new equipment and new things that we need at the school. We cannot use it for ongoing funding to fund our school. So it's a part of our budget. It's a smaller part of our budget. It is there. And of course, with everything changing going on in the federal government, of course, people are very worried that whether that money is going to continue to flow or not, or whether there's anybody in the Department of Education to even manage the Perkins money. So we'll not get into that. But so there are a few different ways that we are funded. And here in Bennington County, you all vote on our budget. And we appreciate that the vast majority of you vote yes on our budget because you seem to very much like Southwest Tech and the work that we do. And we appreciate that. But every voter in Bennington County votes on our budget as well. So, yeah, you're welcome. Sorry, I just got to check the time to make sure I'm not leaving a kid at practice. Yeah, I got a few more minutes. Go ahead.
Is the formula the same for your adult students?
No, adult students pay tuition to be in the programs. The vast majority of students that come to adult education programs receive some form of financial aid, predominantly through VSAC or through their employer. So I would say probably 2/3 to 3/4 of my students don't necessarily pay the tuition. But within CTE, there is no official money for adult technical education. People have to pay tuition to be in our training classes, which are licensed nursing assistant, commercial driver's license, welding, massage therapy. They are programs that do not necessarily require a college degree, but do require some sort of certificate or license to be able to work in those professions. Any other questions?
I have one question.
Sure.
What percentage of the students are high school students as opposed to adults?
Yeah, so probably 80 to 85% of the students that we enroll are high school students. So we usually enroll around 400 or so high school students, and I enroll somewhere around 100 adult students in the evening. But again, keep in mind, they're funded completely differently. So when you vote on your budget for Southwest Tech, you are not voting on any funding for adult technical education. All that is covered by the tuition. Any questions? Okay. Rob is taking from Rob.
Thank you, Rob. So yeah, thank you, Rob. I knew he was a CTE expert, so I conscripted him from the softball field and brought him in to do even more than he had planned on doing. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right.
We
I'm
all
going to stage right to go pick up a kid from practice so that I don't get in trouble. Thank you, everybody.
Bear with me one moment. So we're not done yet, but you can give Phil Scott a call right now and tell him what you want. But Kate, how are we going to do the further questions? Jill, you're going to... So I think we're going to just take a 5-minute break. They're going to collect them, and then we're going to figure out how we're going to go through them. So take a break.
Please pass your cards to them. Anybody need a blank card?
Don't be offended if your question's not asked. Okay, one question. Why allow public funding to support private schools?
What was the question?
Why allow public funding to support private schools?
There are actually, the term in Vermont is independent school, because they're actually very different than private schools in most instances, the vast majority of instances, in that they serve Vermont kids. And we have a system in many parts of the state. The tuition dollars can come only from districts that do not operate a school for those grades. And so we've built up over the course of the last 200 years a system whereby independent schools have filled that void. And in those areas where it's happened and they take place, they are very popular. Like for instance, in the BRSU district, there was a ballot item 2 years ago about whether people wanted to continue with a system of independent schools and tuition the way that the way it's been run for the last 200 years. And the vote was 91 or 92% yes. So I think really understanding the role of independent schools in Vermont is very different than what you might think of when you think of private schools or vouchers. By the way, there's no vouchers in Vermont, that's a myth. There's only tuition from districts that do not operate schools for those grades. So that's why we do it. That's why it's been there. It's a system that works. It's very important. Some of the most compelling testimony we've taken this year was from the northeast quadrant of Vermont, where it's basically the way of life there. And they talked about how critical it is for them in that very rural area. By the way, it's also tended to be in very rural areas where there aren't public schools, and the independent schools have tended to fill in. The other thing I'll say about them is, you have the 4 academies. Let me even back up from this. There's 84,000 school kids in Vermont. Less than 4,000 go to independent schools in Vermont. And the vast majority of those go to the 4 historic academies, and all but 800. And then there are some that go to a place like the Village School or Long Trail, or a handful of other schools. And in a few of those schools, and I'll call out the Compass School over in Westminster and Sheridan Academy, have really come into being to fill a particularized need, and that is, in those instances, kids who are, have been bullied or high anxiety. There's often trans and gay kids, and those schools, just because they're able to do it because they operate differently, are, in my view, very literally saving kids. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that we're talking about Vermont-style independent schools, and a very Vermont system that has worked really well. And then the Village School in North Bennington, running a really great little K through 5? 6. K through 6 school with, doing really well. So I guess that's my answer.
Why do you believe legislators and not educators are better suited to make recommendations and develop proposals? Simply because you are accountable to voters doesn't give you the experience or knowledge to design educational models. Help me understand.
Well, this is about maps, and frankly, in the end, it's partially political. I don't mean large P political, small P political, because it's people making decisions about their own future. And I would say, a couple of reasons is, this is what legislators do. We do this every day. We make huge decisions, huge policy, over the course of a year or 2 years in our committees. And we do it by taking in a lot of testimony and listening to people, like the people who might have been on the House version. And then we make decisions. Another reason that this is, I think, really important that it be legislators is that we'll then have embedded in the legislature 6 or 8, whatever it ends up being, people who really understand how we got to where we are over the course of the summer. Every 10 years, there is a reapportionment after the census when we redraw lines for legislators. And we have this process whereby these outside group of people who are appointed, some from the House, some from the Senate, and the governor, however it works, who go through this process of drawing they spend, 18 months, hearings, meetings around Vermont, drawing proposed legislative boundaries. Then they're given to the legislature. They last about 10 minutes before they go in the trash and we start over. Because that's always happened. Because legislators, there's nobody in the legislature who went through that process, understands it, and I just believe it's fundamentally our responsibility, and I believe we are, as we are with huge policy changes all the time, fully capable of making a decision after a lot of public input.
The Public Assets Institute, a Vermont nonprofit, advocates keeping much of the current structure and paying for it entirely through taxes on income. If everyone were to pay the same share of income for schools, for example, taxes for the lower half could be lower than they are now, because currently high-income earners just pay on the value of their house, not on all their income. Are you familiar with the public assets analysis? If so, what do you think of it?
I haven't looked at it in detail. I know the Public Assets Institute well. And it is possible you could do some portion of this with income, but you have to recognize that income is very volatile. Income taxes are volatile, depending on what's happening in the world. Whether we have seen over the course of 30 years in Vermont, we've seen income tax revenue go like this. Property tax revenue tends to be, it's very stable because the property doesn't go anywhere. And the largest share of all the tax revenue we take into Vermont, a large part of it, I can't remember what the percentages, but come from the property tax. And if we were to do it through some other mechanism, we'd have a very, very high income tax. We're already a fairly high income tax. And so the thought of making income taxes a lot higher is pretty iffy. So you put those two things together and it's not so clear that it's a great idea. It's worthy of consideration, but not so clear it's a great idea.
Okay. Communities can vote up their budgets. Doesn't this bring us back to the gold town scenario?
No, I don't think so. No, because the system will, number one, the problem with the old foundation formula, there is a potential problem with the foundation formula. And it is that the legislature doesn't fund it. The legislature wants the money for something else and doesn't fund the foundation formula. So what we're trying to do with this is set it high enough so that most districts won't even vote extra money because they'll have enough money from the foundation formula to run their schools at a really good level. And by the way, we have in the intent section of this that the goal is to provide excellent educational opportunity for every Vermont child. That's the goal. And so if we're funding the system truly to 100% of what it should cost the district to do it, the reason to give that little bit of extra possibility, there's a reason we're limiting it to 10%, and that's part of the reason, by the way, so that we don't slip back into a different system. But we want to give communities the ability to raise money for like an assessment for school repairs, or maybe to get something up and running that we can't foresee. But it will be done. This is what the Ways and Means Committee in the House did this, and the Senate Finance Committee is working on something similar, where if you raise that money, it'll be that part will have some similarities to the current system, because if you are more property wealthy, it will cost you more to do it. If you're not as property wealthy, it will cost you less. So there's a mechanism in there so that it is just as hard or just as easy, depending on anywhere in Vermont, to raise the money, depending on where your property wealth lies.
You mentioned resistance to eliminating class size and district size mandates and Senate revisions. Can you talk more about this?
So I think what I said was that, that people are very concerned about the sort of one-size-fits-all, top-down mandating of school sizes and class sizes. And I tend to be, at least for my part, as I've been thinking about this and involved in schools for a long time, I tend to not be a favor of in somebody who supports the notion of one size fits all. And I really think that, and if we try to do something like that for Montpelier, we run the risk of imposing something that ends up not making sense in a lot of districts. And let me give you an example here. And I was just talking to somebody about this, and I've talked to Nicole about this in the past. In this district, in this large area, Bennington County, we've got two, if you will, truly public schools, Mount Anthony and Arlington. If we went with the proposal from the governor, or perhaps House committee, Arlington would be forced to close because it wouldn't meet the mandatory minimum sizes, perhaps. And yet, so even though our bill is looking toward more regional high schools, in fact, the language we're using is community elementary, a little bit more centralized middle schools, and more regional high schools. But even within that, if you take the dynamic of Mount Anthony and Arlington, just by way of example, Mount Anthony has all these offerings. Because it's a larger school, it can offer things that a smaller school can't. We were here tonight watching the kids getting ready for a major performance, spring musical, and band and music and sports teams and all. There's things, better, larger arts programs, music programs. There's things you can do with larger schools. But at the same time, no school is the right school for every kid, at least in my view. And the fact that you've got some kids from Bennington and Powell or Shasberry going to Arlington to go to school says something. And what it might be saying is that you need an alternative school, a smaller school, more small school setting. Maybe it becomes more of a niche school than it is now. I don't know. But I don't want to make that decision. I think the people in this district need to make that decision. And I think, at least just for the sake of discussion, there's a real argument to be made that even though Arlington wouldn't fit, the mandatory class and school size, I think a real argument to be made that the people of this district might say, nevertheless, we need that alternative. We need that school for the kids who are, there's more to it than this. I don't want to overemphasize that one point, but who are just going to thrive in a different setting. And we've got the same dynamic on my end of the county with Burn Burton and Long Trail, right? Burn Burton is kind of the Mount Anthony, a lot of offerings, but some kids actually could be going to Burn Burton, go to Arlington, some go to Long Trail. And, as somebody who was on the board of Burn Burton at the time, every time when I knew that was happening, my response was, that's great, because they're going to the school that's the right school for them. And I want to make sure that we're not closing down those kinds of opportunities for kids as we're thinking through how to put all this together.
Do any of the proposals include looking at statewide curriculum, or are they solely focused on districting and funding?
The governor's proposal, the secretary's proposal, did talk about uniform, statewide uniform curriculum. I was just having a discussion, and again, it's kind of speaking for myself. Number one, that's not going to happen in this bill, and these bills at this point, either the House or the Senate. It's too much, too soon, whatever. But my own view is, and again, here I am speaking as one person, one member of the Senate, I'm very, very skeptical of the notion of statewide curriculum. I think model curriculum is great. And for the agency to put out model curriculum that schools can use or adapt or whatever they want to do with it is great. I'm all for it. But I think I want to leave the ability for teachers to teach and teachers to innovate for three teachers from different disciplines to be talking and come up with some course that nobody else has, but that weaves everything together into one, I want to be able to do that. So I'll just say very, very skeptical of the notion of mandated statewide curriculum.
Insurance has been mentioned repeatedly as a huge cost in school budgets. Are there regulations restricting school districts buying into Vermont Health Connect? The high number of participants would reduce school cost and premiums for thousands of Vermonters.
So the way it works I haven't spent a ton of time on this very minutia of this issue yet, but there's a statewide negotiated teachers healthcare package, and so I think all the schools are in it together, and it's negotiated on a statewide basis. That happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Any of my legislative friends up there? A few years ago, yeah. That has resulted in very high premiums. So we have to, that's one of the things we have to get a handle on. But the answer is it's done on a statewide basis.
Okay. What will be the role of local school boards? Will they be eliminated?
Well, districts have boards, so it will depend on the size of the districts. Under the governor's proposal, you'd have 5 school boards. So you wouldn't have 119 school boards. You would have had five school boards of 5 members. So, that's not going to happen. But in the end, the number of school boards will depend on the number of districts.
What would happen to ISD schools in Bennington County? Southshire, Village School, Shaftesbury, are we losing school choice?
Under the governor's proposal, we would have lost a lot of what school choice is. The House proposal, we would have lost some. Under the Senate proposal, right now, school choice is intact the way that it is now. We have, by the way, so people know this, there's a moratorium on new independent schools, so we're talking about the existing structure. And so the Senate proposal would make it possible for the Village School to continue, the Net Southshire, obviously Long Trail, Burnham, and others.
Okay.
Sorry, is that yes, Southshire and Shaftesbury would also stay open, or they would close? I didn't understand that.
Southshire, I believe, would stay open. But under the Senate proposal, there is, this gets a little complicated, but the Senate proposal says that what we're trying to do is preserve school choice, tuition program, independent schools in areas of the state where they are integral to the delivery system. And so there is language in the bill that says that in order for an independent school to continue to receive tuition, 2-part test, it would have to be in a supervisory union that doesn't operate schools for the grades in question. So for instance, a school that was in one of the larger supervisory districts up in Chittenden County would no longer be eligible to receive tuition. The other is that they would have to have had in the 23-24 school year, 25% of their kids be tuition kids. On the theory that, the governor's proposal said it had to be 51%, it might be way too high. But at 25%, it's kind of by definition integral to the system, but if it's much less than that, you can make a case it's not integral to the system, and therefore it would not be eligible for the tuition after like 28 or whenever we would start this up. So it largely, in large measure, leaves the tuition program in independent schools intact, especially in the bands of the state, which are really going to be the northeast quadrant, the southwest quadrant in the area around Thetford Academy in Orange County, where it's just critical to the delivery system.
What does limit tuition options mean in practice?
I guess that's what I just said, I think. Yeah.
How is pre-existing need or abundance of materials, facilities taken into account?
Does that mean pre-existing needs for buildings?
It just says how is pre-existing need or abundance of materials, facilities taken into account? It doesn't sound like it's talking about students. It's talking about what a district has. That's what I'm interpreting.
I don't really know how to answer that question, except that to say that the money would be allocated on a per pupil basis, so every part of the state would get the same amount of money per pupil, weighted pupil, and have the same opportunities as anybody anywhere else in the state. So it's on that level, it's really a very equalizing system, equalizing in terms of opportunity.
Does that answer the question, whoever asked it?
Certainly, Senator. What are the plans for more rural schools consolidation that continues to make sure smaller communities are heard and represented? What is the goal for the rural communities to look like 5 to 10 years after the plan has been implemented?
That is a great question, and it's one that my committee has spent a great deal of time on. There's the new Rural School Alliance that has come together to raise these issues and bring them to the committee. We've had them in a few times. As we are putting this together, we really have to recognize the reality of life on the ground in Vermont, right? The governor's proposal, and I started off giving him a lot of credit for doing it, and that's always top of mind for me because I do. But those 5 districts really didn't account for the fact that different parts of the state are very, very different. Travel patterns, very rural versus pretty urban, and everything in between. And so my committee, I will tell you, is very attuned to rural Vermont as we're thinking this through. And what we put together really has to work for rural Vermont, and where by definition we're going to have smaller schools, right? And that's okay, because that's what, those are what the opportunities are. So we want to, if anything, improve educational opportunities for rural Vermont, but as we're doing it, recognize that rural Vermont's different than urban Vermont.
Okay. One of your slides stated an alternative that encourages voluntary consolidation with appropriate incentives. How does that differ from the previous incentives from consolidation?
There's probably a lot of similarity. It's technical assistance grants, grants to help with consolidation, maybe more support for putting together the model. I think the real difference will be that I think there might be more interest than there was with Act 46, because people are going to see, I think, that the funding system works better with larger districts and the more opportunities are created. But larger district might mean, for some areas of the state, 2,000 kids or something like that, might mean 4,000 for others. I'm not really sure, but I think it has a lot of similarities, but I think that the incentive to do it might be greater this time around.
If Bennington County is doing well, why is our model being targeted? Why aren't the areas that aren't doing well being asked to modify their models and leave ours alone? What works in other counties may not work in ours. We are a very different community with very different needs from Burlington or Montpelier.
Yeah, nobody's being targeted, number one. That's not remotely the point or what anybody's trying to do. I think what everybody's trying to do is provide more opportunity for kids. And I think the Senate model, frankly, when you think, like I said at the beginning, Bennington County is relatively efficient. So the Bennington County may be one of the areas of the state that gets the least impacted by this, except for the fact that the formula shows there will be some more money to help educate kids.
Okay, last question. Can you explain how the funding formula is established and how does this affect teacher contract negotiations?
We don't know the answer to that last part yet, especially as districts can consolidate. If they do, there's a lot of complications in that for teachers' contracts. But I will say that in the intent language of this, one of the first things that we say is that one of the goals is to increase teacher pay. The larger the district, a little bit more opportunity there is to do that. I forgot the first part of that question. Oh, how does the foundation formula work? Yeah, the foundation formula works with a combination of foundation amount, and let me just say the numbers being played with are somewhere between 13,000 and 15,000 a kid. And then, however, that's before weighting, and then the weights come in. The weighting, the additional weights that get applied if the kid is at a very small school, for instance, in a rural area of the state. You get a little bit more money because it's more expensive to run those small schools in a rural area. Or English as second language, so in parts of the state, we all have it. We all have kids who are English second, and there's a weight for that, a weight for poverty. And so the foundation formula mixes all of those things together, and part of the discussion is how much each of those weights should be, and then that determines the weighted per pupil amount that follows the student. So, let me
Thank
say,
you for your questions. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to ask all of them.
let me say,
Follow up on that
could-
last- I'm sorry.
oh, okay, yeah.
Senator, so does that include that weighted, does that include special education as well?
Special education isn't a weight, it's a census block grant. It's a different, that comes through a different mechanism.
Okay.
A lot of federal money involved in that. So, hoping for the best there. And what I was going to say as we wrap up is, this is really the beginning of this, because, for instance, next year, by the way I talk about this is, there's 1,000 moving pieces here, and we're able, at this point to kind of get our arms around, I don't know, some number of them, but it's what we're really talking about is developing a framework that then allows for more work over the summer and fall. All four involved committees, the House and the Senate Education Committees, the Ways and Means Committee, the Finance Committee. Next year, same kind of focus on this, because to the extent we've dealt with whatever number of those 1,000 moving pieces this year, we got to do a whole nother block next year to fill in underneath, and then probably the year after that. So this is the beginning of a process, and I assume we will see you all back here again over the course of the next 2 or 3 years.
So I'd like to thank Seth and Rob for their time today and for agreeing to put on this program for our benefit. This is a huge issue for everybody in the state, and it's going to affect every community, including ours. So I think it's really important that we have an opportunity to hear straight from the people who are involved in this conversation about what's going on. And then I'd like to say a couple of quick thanks. One to the SVSU staff, to Laura Boudreaux, Christine Gabbers, and Katie West for their terrific support in helping us. Without their support, we would never have been able to put this on. So this was a big help for us. I also want to thank all the speakers who were here today, the people from AUW and Bennington County Indivisible, which I'm a member. Many of us are retired teachers. Many of us are people who have a very strong interest in education. And as Seth just mentioned, we'll be doing this again. So we'll be absolutely getting a hold of you probably next spring to have another conversation about where we're at that time. And thank you all for coming. I really appreciate your interest. So.